to Ask the Experts. I'm Jill Schlesinger, editor-at-large of CBS Money Watch. I'm joined by
Jack Otter, executive editor of CBSMoneyWatch.com.
And we've got two great guests today.
Yeah, who are we going to start with?
Well, I think I'll start with Brian because he's new to the house.
All right,
and
good.
he's in the house. So Brian Montopoli is a senior political reporter. How could you be senior? You're like 5 years old. It's ridiculous.
I'm 34. And
Oh,
we're
my
the web, so
You're
it doesn't
old.
take a lot to get seniority if you're on the web.
Excellent. Well, he is the senior political reporter for CBSNews.com, and he does that political analysis on CBS Radio and on CBS News broadcasts, Washington Unplugged, and Up to the Minute. They're using and abusing you.
They are.
I'm sure they're not paying you enough. Until September 2007, Montopoli was editor of Public Eye, the innovative CBS News blog, bringing greater transparency to CBS News and the rest of the media. Anyway, he's got a huge background. Let me just say, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Slate, Salon, Legal. I mean, what?
Old media, new media, he's got it all covered, yeah.
Wow. I'm really enjoying the show so far.
He went to Georgetown.
Smart guy,
Very
too, yeah.
fancy,
A little
right?
inside the beltway, though, huh?
Yes.
true,
He
it's
graduated with degrees in English and economics. Now, that is a very excellent resume.
Well, thank you.
However, you don't have a word that I can never pronounce in your resume, which Mark Toma, our favorite blogger at Money Watch, the macroeconomist and time series econometrician. Is that how you pronounce it, Mark? Thank God. Okay, he's at the University of Oregon, and that's why he's not wearing a tie. And his research focuses on how monetary policy affects the economy. He's also worked on political business cycle models of transportation dynamics. He blogs daily at his own gig at Economist View, but follow him at Twitter at Mark Toma and here at Money Watch. And so, guys, you are brought together a dream team of sorts because we just had the State of the Union. We had the Federal Open Market Committee meeting. So, Brian, how about some overall impressions of the State of the Union? How'd you think the president did? What was your couple of your takeaways?
Well, it was about framing the 2012 election. I mean, I don't want to be too cynical and say it was just an election speech. Obviously, there was some policy in there, but for the most part, this was talking about Obama's vision versus the Republican vision and what argument Americans are going to accept. Are they going to accept President Obama's argument, and this is about the Buffett rule, which I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about, that everyone deserves a fair shake and that his policies will allow them to have one? Or will they accept the Republican argument, which is that Obama's had 3 years, the economy is still struggling, and his policies have failed, and it's time for somebody new? Whoever wins that framing fight is going to win the 2012 election.
And Jack, how about you? What did you think were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, I have to say, I thought it was a pretty good political speech. It didn't seem as if the ideas that he presented were fully formed, except for maybe the Buffett rule. But you didn't really expect that. I mean, he's not able to get anything past Congress right now, so spending a whole lot of time laying out a careful agenda, frankly, would have been a waste of time. He needs to set up the political fight, and he did a good job of that. And I do think the Buffett rule actually it kind of does both things. It sets up.
Why don't you define that first?
Oh, sure. Well, Buffett has said for years, actually, this has only come to the fore recently, but for a long time, gosh, I think certainly in the 90s, Buffett was saying that it's absurd that he should pay a lower tax rate than his secretary. And in fact, years ago, he offered a challenge to any CEO who could show that he paid a higher tax rate than his secretary, and I think Buffett offered to give $1 million to charity in that chief executive officer's name. And as far as I know, no one has come forward yet. It's a very good political line. It's kind of homespun in the Buffett way, but it does also bring up a good point. Now, it glosses over the very important technicality that often the compensation for these CEOs is in capital gains and interest payments, which are taxed at a much lower rate than ordinary income. So people who don't agree with this will say, look, he's mixing apples and oranges. It makes no sense. But I think you could step back a little bit farther from 30,000 feet and say, should we have a tax structure that allows a Mitt Romney, who is getting paid very big money from a job he hasn't had for 15 years or so, 13.9%, while Newt Gingrich is paying 31%.
It was the one time I felt bad for Newt. Or he got smacked on his taxes, right, Brian?
Well, I mean, I want to pick up on that quickly. One point I would make is that income is, at least in theory, double taxed, right? So even if you're only paying 15% on your investment income, that's corporate money that was previously taxed, and that's what those folks like to point out, that this is, yes, it's a 15% rate, but I mean, obviously most...
Oh, wait, there's one difference, though. That's true with your plain old capital gains, but that carve out for carried interest, which is just for private equity funds and just for hedge fund managers, which is supposedly because they are creating capital on some level, is nonsense.
Right.
It's completely nonsense. I ran an investment advisory firm. My income was taxed at ordinary income. Why is that different than a private equity investment firm? So that's, to me, the capital gains is a totally different discussion. Carried interest is something ridiculous, a ridiculous loophole that should be closed.
The key distinction here is that with capital gains and dividend, it's your own money that's at risk. And therefore, the idea is you're given an incentive to risk your own money in our capitalist society. With carried interest in hedge funds, it's not your own money. It's your client's money. So it's just the way they happen to get paid.
And the notion, I think most Americans would look at Mitt Romney, they'd say, this is a guy who has not been working for a long time. I mean, he himself describes himself as unemployed. He made $20 million, more than $20 million a year the last couple of years, doing nothing. And you can argue, I mean, certainly it makes it hard to make the case that, well, we have to tax these things at 15% because he's a job creator. What jobs was Mitt Romney creating in the last 2 years? I guess his campaign staff. But beyond that, it's just a really tough argument to make. And, you know, Mitt Romney's greatest strength going into this election was supposed to be his business experience, right? Like John Kerry's biggest strength was supposed to be his military experience. What's happening now, like what happened with John Kerry, is that strength is turning into a weakness because his opponents, and not just on the Democratic side, but on the Republican side, are scoring points by going after what is supposed to be his strength.
Right. That's very interesting. Mark, you're with us. You back? We had a little technical difficulty. All right. Now, Mark, you've got something sticking in your craw about the president's speech last night, and I think it's a four-letter word, which I'll allow you to say yourself. Is it jobs?
It's jobs. That's the right four-letter word.
Phew. And what's the problem here? Why is he skirting the issue?
I think he doesn't want to make promises that he might not be able to keep with such a short time before the election. So I think this is a political calculation not to put a lot of short-run programs in place to deal with the problems we have right now. So most of what I saw in the speech in terms of dealing with the jobs problem was really about the long-run issues, sort of our structural problems, moving manufacturing back to the U.S., building infrastructure, all those sorts of things. What I didn't see is a big commitment to a short-run job creation program to get people working tomorrow, the next day after that. There was a little bit in that direction, but from my point of view, not enough. And again, I think they understand this. I think they'd like to do more, but I think they're afraid if they actually did more and it turned out not to work by the election, then they'd have to answer once again why it looked like their stimulus package didn't work.
Yeah, I think the once again is a key point. I think, Mark, you're referring to their incredibly stupid political decision in 2009 to predict that unemployment would not go over 8%. And that was probably the biggest single political mistake that this team has made.
They only missed it by 2.2%. How could you say that?
As Alan Roth says in every column on MoneyWatch.com, economists can't make predictions like that. I'm sure Mark Toma has never tried, because it's just always wrong. In 2008, 50 Bloomberg economists said the market was going up, not one said it was going down. We just shouldn't make predictions. They did, and they're paying for it big time.
Now, there were some other parts of the economy that President Obama did focus on. And, Brian, I mean, how often do you think that some of these initiatives that are proposed in a State of the Union actually make it anywhere? I mean, it's great for a speech, but now what?
Yeah, I mean, State of the Unions are about laying out a vision. They're not about, tick-tocking actual proposals. And we're also we're in an election year. We've got a divided Congress. I mean, realistically, what we heard last night, the payroll tax cut, which is set to expire in February, I think we can expect that to be extended. Not sure how it's going to be paid, but I think both parties want to do that. Beyond that, it's hard to think of one initiative in that speech that's actually going to happen. Maybe some of these tax incentives for companies to have jobs in America as opposed to abroad, but that's like one of those ideas like lowering the corporate tax rate, where everyone says they want to do it, but it never actually seems to happen.
Right, that's the manufacturing incentives, but that would have to require some congressional agreement as well, and I don't really see why there would be anything. Like, in other words, is there any reason why the Republicans would want to make any deal on anything unless they're seen as embarrassed by not making the deal?
I mean, I think the only way we're going to see this is on issues where the Republicans are already there. Obama talked about cutting regulations a little bit. Obviously, Republicans love to talk about that. He talked about opening up offshore drilling. I mean, we all remember the 2008 Republican convention with drill, baby, drill. Obviously, Obama's saying, I want to open up offshore drilling. Republicans aren't going to stand in his way. But on anything where Obama could be seen as gaining political gain, on anything, and I don't want to be too cynical, but if we're talking about something that could help the economy in a way that would benefit Obama in an electoral
Right,
sense,
they're not going to do it.
they're not going to be enthusiastic about it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I found the opening to drilling very interesting. That was one of the few surprises that I saw in the speech, and I wonder if he's going to try to set up something where he puts that out there with something else attached that he wants, and try to say to the Republicans, hey, you guys talk about drilling, here's your drilling, and try to force them to accept something else as part of that.
But of course, anything about clean energy, which is his big thing, they're just going to say Solyndra,
Yeah,
Solyndra,
Solyndra,
Solyndra.
right. Exactly.
One response. And let's talk about responses for a second. Jack, the Republican response, what'd you think?
To tell you the truth, I caught about the first half of it, then I had to go edit our story on Obama's economic proposals. At the very beginning, I thought, wow, he's being so conciliatory right down the middle. And then he said, by any measure, the economy is worse than it was when Obama took office. And that surprised me. I guess you can get away with that kind of rhetoric, but it's actually an absurd statement. I mean, if you think back to how awful things were then.
Yeah, we were
you know,
losing 700,000 jobs a month.
Right. There was a reason that the Dow was at 6,000 then, is at 12,000 now. So things are not worse. Things are not nearly as much better as we would all like them to be. And to me, that's the key point. You know, is it Obama's fault that they're not better? Or was it that the recession was so bad we're climbing out at kind of the expected rate?
And Mark, let me ask you a question. The president talked about some sort of foreclosure mitigation, and we know that housing has really been a huge drag on the economy. What do you think about any plans that could happen, whether this is tied to the settlement or not with the 50 states attorney general? What do you think's happening here?
I think it's something that would definitely help. I think household balance sheet problems are a big problem in getting the economy restarted. But the notion that we're going to have Republicans going along with a program to, say, reduce mortgage payments by individuals. I mean, there was the one proposal to allow people to refinance cheaply that was in the State of the Union address, and maybe that'll get through. But I really can't imagine the Republicans okaying any of these big mortgage relief programs going forward, even though I think they help a lot.
And Brian, you were wondering how exactly that gets paid for. So if, in other words, what is there going to be some sort of carrot that is dangled out for banks to refinance, or is it going to be mandated, or is it going to be paid for as part of that global settlement?
Oh, me?
Yeah, you. Yeah, you, smarty pants.
The best thing to do, in my view, would be in the short run, take it onto the federal government's balance sheet. So transfer debt from the private sector to the public sector. You don't increase total debt at all, but you increase household confidence. That allows them to go out and consume more. Then we can pay off the government debt later with a higher level of GDP, a higher level of the tax base to pay it off. And so that's the kind of program I'd like to see. And so you pay for it the same way you pay for any other government program, in the short run through spending and the longer run through taxes.
It's tough to do it at the private level because the banks, those mortgages they do carry on their books, they don't want to admit that they're not actually going to work. They want to carry that as long as possible, and so their earnings announcement next quarter will look a little better than it will, you know, and maybe a couple years from now they'll be in better shape. But the other problem is a lot of those mortgages they don't own anymore. They've been securitized, and there's just no way to get 1,000, 1 million investors to all agree to cut the rate on my loan or your loan or anything else. So technically, it's very tricky.
Now, I just want to move to taxes, back to taxes for a second, Brian. You know, when you look at polling and look at CBS News polling, it seems to me that Republicans or Democrats are really way off. But if you actually ask your friends, you know, in a conversation, it doesn't seem like they're so far apart. So is it the way we're framing the question, or is there really a big divide between people and their view about how the government should be taxing income and capital gains? There
is a divide between parties, no question, but overall, the Democrats have the argument that the American people have on this. I mean, we had a poll come out this week on a CBS News New York Times poll that said a majority of Americans, and it was a slim majority, but a majority of Americans feel that the investment income, the Mitt Romney-style income, should be taxed at the same rate as wages. And 55% said the wealthiest Americans do not pay their fair share of taxes. That is exactly the argument President Obama is making. And if he can win 55% of Americans, he's going to win this election. So yeah, a lot of Republicans don't agree with that, but those people aren't going to be voting for the Democrats anyway. That's why this is the argument that the Democrats are pushing. They're pushing this fairness argument. They're pushing this Buffett rule argument. That's how they think they're going to win this thing.
And Mark, I just have a quick question for you. When you look at oh, I just lost Mark. Okay, forget it. Jack, I have a question for you. How about this? When you look at that argument, do you think that it actually has any chance of it coming to something? In other words, are we really going to see a tax overhaul in the next couple of years, maybe?
I can't imagine this year that it could possibly happen because nobody wants to give any ground. I mean, we're in a really sad place in this country where nobody wants progress because there's that fear that the other side might get credit for that progress. If Obama should, well, frankly, whoever wins, I could see that a political realignment that would lead to some changes. Brian was talking about where the polling is, and on the other side, on the Republican side, I do see a pretty distinct, strong feeling. There's that line, I never got a job from a poor guy. You have the Thomas Frank book, What's the Matter with Kansas, where he argues that people actually vote against their own economic interests. So there is a strong strain in this country that even though it's not me who's going to see raised taxes, I don't want you to do it either because it's not the American way or because the government's going to waste the money, or there are many arguments. So I think it's tough, even despite those polling numbers, to pull off, and there's no way it's going to happen before the election. But I think, when you throw together Simpson Bowles, if you put together the idea of what if we were to tax all income at the same level but lower it all, and maybe you could get a little bit better than revenue neutral, so you get a little more income to reduce the deficit. I mean, there are many paths to an agreement here if we could get past this problem that nobody, frankly, really wants to make progress.
Let me just add really quick, we are facing down the prospect of the expiration of the Bush tax cuts soon after the election.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one area where if you let those Bush tax cuts expire, the wealthiest are going to see, and we're talking about the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest because the Bush tax cuts were for everyone.
Yeah, but they're going to let them all expire. You could let them all expire.
You could let them all expire, but I don't think either party's going to do that. But the Democrats want to let them expire for the wealthiest Americans. Now, these tax cuts have been a major driver of the deficit, one of the biggest drivers of the deficit. And so I think that if Obama wins this election with this argument, I think he's going to have a strong case, even if we have potentially two chambers of Congress going to the Republicans, which we very well could have. He's going to have a pretty strong argument, particularly with where we are in the deficit, to say we have to not let these tax cuts continue for the wealthiest Americans.
Hey, Mark, are you back with us? Do we have you now?
I'm back with
Excellent.
you.
So, Mark, a couple of things. Number one is if we let the tax cuts expire for all Americans, tell me what that looks like as a drag on the economy in 2013. If everybody's taxes went up in 2013, what happens?
I think you'd have a significant downward drag on the economy. I don't know if it'd be as much as 1% down, but it'd be somewhere, 0.5%, 1%, something like that. I'd expect a fairly significant drag on the economy if they let those tax cuts expire. So I think it's important that until the economy gets on better footing, they keep these tax cuts in place. Now, in the longer run, we're going to have to pay off the deficit. Taxes have to go up at some point, and the question is who they have to go up on. Certainly they need to go up on the wealthy. Whether the other people need to pay more or not, that's a political decision we'll have to make. But in the short run, I think it'd be disastrous to begin raising taxes, raising interest rates, doing anything like that.
Okay. Oh, now you mentioned interest rates because your buddies over at the Fed just had a little meeting, and replete with chart porn like you can't believe. It was fabulous. So Ben Bernanke and the Federal Reserve say keeping rates basically at zero, and they said we used to think it was going to be through middle of 2013, now through the end of 2014. But Mark, they also talked about their own forecast. Now, how do you feel about releasing these Fed members' forecasts about where the economy is going to be and when interest rates are going to start rising? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's generally a good thing. There's some chance it could confuse people, but I think pundits are going to pay attention to it. I don't think the general public's going to pay a whole lot of attention to it. We already had a pretty good idea what the central tendency is for these forecasts, what the average forecast is. What we really didn't know a lot about was the variation in the forecasts over time. And this is going to give us a lot more information about the variation. But I don't think it's going to change our expectations a whole lot or make a lot of difference to the general public.
The public doesn't care about the Fed. They just know that Ron Paul says it's bad. Let's get rid of
Well,
him.
I think there are two key points to me, at least. One is that while predictions are useless, the direction of predictions is actually useful. I mean, bettors know this. So if the point spread is closing, odds are that the game is going to be tighter than the bookies originally predicted. This is true with elections, and it's true with economic predictions. If all economists start going more negative or positive, there's a good chance that the actual economy will follow that way. And the other thing is, even while their prediction of growth isn't that important, I do think the promise to keep rates low does have an effect on the market.
Obviously.
You know,
Today the market's gone up as a result. We were trading lower, and it looked kind of like a rotten day was shaping up. And market closed up 80 points on the Dow, and, we're up 1% basically.
and there's a lot of reasons why the 10-year bond is at historic lows, but I do think one of them is the fact that everybody knows the Fed is not going to be setting the Fed funds rate higher soon.
It really is sort of an amazing thing. I will point out that the Federal Reserve and some of their people are not the greatest predictors of anything. Because remember that back in, Mark, was it 2004 when Bernanke said everyone should go out and get an adjustable rate mortgage?
Yes.
I mean, that was a nice call.
That Greenspan?
I mean, Greenspan
Yeah.
said that. And that Mr. Bernanke testified before Congress that he didn't think that the housing market was going to really substantially affect or impact the economy. Not a good. So why should we believe them? And what's the point of this?
The academic evidence tells us that once you get beyond about 6 months out, you may as well just flip a coin. You should just guess the trend. We're not going to do very well in terms of forecasting. Up until about that 6-month horizon, the Fed does pretty well, and it tends to do a little bit better than the private forecasters if you look at the evidence. So I think when you talk about how well can the Fed forecast, in the short run, next few months, they do pretty well. They tend to miss turning points, but they do pretty well otherwise. In the longer run, they don't do well at all.
And all right, so before we wrap up, that noise that you hear is that Mark is pedaling very quickly. That's how he's operating his Skype right now. He's a little Fred Flintstone-esque. As we close the show out, Jack, what's your takeaway from the State of the Union, or even the Fed, or mush it together? How are you feeling today? Mark just went away.
I'm feeling optimistic emotionally, and my logical brain is telling me to cut that out. There were so many openings in the speech last night for compromise, where like I was saying before, Obama can say let's drill, and the Republicans can say that's great, but Obama says you got to give me this. But Simpson Bowles was nothing but difficult, tough, smart compromises, and it went absolutely nowhere. So I'm afraid when you get in the pits of Congress, I'm not so optimistic.
And Brian, how are you feeling this morning? Or this afternoon, now?
Look, I mean, my biggest takeaway from last night is just the difference between the way Obama cast the economy, which was in the State of the Union, which is things are getting better, and what did Mitch Daniels said? He said the State of the Union is grave. And that's what we're going to be talking about, right? And that's why these economic numbers, which have ticked up in the last couple months, whether it's the unemployment rate going down or some of these other positive indicators, that's going to affect it. And we were just talking about how you don't know what's going to happen 6 months out, right? Well, in 6 months, if the economy is looking a lot better, if Obama's argument that the State of the Union is getting stronger, it's hard to see him losing the election. And if Mitch Daniels is right, if the economy is weak, if the State of the Union is grave, then it's hard to see him winning. And that was my big takeaway from last night.
Yeah, and I would say this, that when you listen to all of this, try to digest it and think about it really rationally. That, you don't have to cast it as them versus us. You sort of say, oh, wait a minute. They're actually pretty close on lots of issues. That's a good sign. That's Jack's enthusiasm. But, we're in a place where you're going to have a kind of nothingness happen for the rest of the year. Maybe we'll get an awesome lame duck session. Maybe we'll have a fantastic session where they get a lot done. That happened last time, right, after the election.
Absolutely.
There was a lot of work got done then. But when it comes to most of this stuff in your own financial life, and as you think about this, try not to transpose your well, if I were a rich person, I wouldn't want to do this. Think about it. What makes sense? Does it make sense that 14% income tax or effective rate? Does that really make sense? If that seems reasonable to you, then you want to keep the status quo. If it doesn't seem reasonable to you, then you got to vote a different way. So think of it that way. Hey, Mark, I got you back for the last section of the show, which is your big takeaway from the State of the Union and the Fed meeting. Do it all at once, baby.
The big takeaway from the Fed meeting was I was surprised that they eased further. To me, that was a big surprise. And so it indicates that the change in the committee has made them more dovish, and I think that's a good thing. the takeaway from the State of the Union is I think Obama's getting a bit tougher. He's taking it to the Republicans a bit more, but I'd like to see him be quite a bit more aggressive on the jobs front.
All right, I like it. This is a good panel. Mark, when you get yourself a brand new, once you get rid of that TRS-DOS computer, that Tandy computer, we'd love to have you back on.
Oh, thank you.
And so if you want to follow Mark at Mark Toma, or you can go on to his blog here at Money Watch or at Economist View. And Brian Montopoli, this has been a fantastic first. I feel like we should have, it's like Hollywood, introducing Brian Montopoli. First of all, you got a great name.
Well, thank you.
Rolls right off the tongue.
Thanks.
Even though your youth, you seem older than your years.
Maybe we could get him into the Hollywood Squares thing even.
That would be awesome.
The intro, yeah. He hasn't seen that yet,
Yes,
so let's not
that's
show it to
sadly,
him.
Excited.
that's going to be good. I hear that you may actually jump on Twitter at some point, but if you really want to see any of your stuff, you go to where?
Well, you can go to our political hot sheet blog on cbsnews.com, and we also have a Twitter with I think 20,000 followers on
Yes,
Hot
you
Sheet.
do. I just checked
I know.
it out.
I know. I need to get on my own personal Twitter.
We're going to have that whole branding conversation.
Yeah, we
later.
need to have that
I know.
conversation.
But it's great, and you write great stuff, and it's fantastic to have you here, and we'd love to have you back.
I'd
So-
love to be back.
And of course, Megan's going to build a new studio for us, so it won't be 8,000 degrees. Jack, final moment, anything you need to say? You got a new tie on. I've never seen that tie. It's a new old tie.
Yeah, it's a new old tie
Yeah.
with birds and stuff because it's the cold winter day. Well, first of all, I want to remind Mark that computers are tax deductible, and I've heard that educators can even get good deals on them.
Yes.
So it might be time for him
And
to
why
step
isn't
up.
he at Davos anyway? Come on.
So no, I'm just praying for compromise. And all the points we're making, if you're rational about it, there's so much blame to go around. I mean, if you don't like deficits, you can blame Reagan, you can blame Greenspan, you can blame people on either side of the aisle. There's so many steps that we could take that would be reasonable, and yet we're not able to do them. And I understand why Americans are frustrated, and I think if you could get another gang of 6 or gang of 7, I mean, what a great way to get yourself reelected right now, to say, hey, I went across the aisle, I made pals with whoever it is, and we got X and Y done. I'd vote for those people no matter what party they're
Yes,
from.
but you are very rational, man.
okay,
And you're also a New York elite.
Yeah,
Don't
that's
forget
true.
that.
Whoa.
I know, I'm with you. And you're not, and you're watching, and thanks so much for watching. Next week on Ask the Experts, I don't know what we're going to do. Maybe we'll do a jobs preview, because next week we have a big jobs report coming out. I know Mark loves to talk about jobs. Maybe we'll get him with a brand new computer. Brian, thanks so much. Mark, thanks so much. Thank you for watching. I'm Jill Schlesinger,
I'm Jack Otter.
and we'll see you next week on Ask the Experts.